Speaking in Washington, D.C., the NASA leader has invited pressure from the Western governments to check the current political crisis. Odinga claiming Western diplomats in the country have been compromised.
I have come to Washington to convey a simple message. We need a much fuller engagement for the many arms of governance that your country possesses to assist the envoys based in Nairobi.
The opposition chief indicting envoys of worsening the political stalemate for blindly being boxed into backing the Jubilee administration.
The envoys' efforts up to now have not succeeded in diffusing the crisis. But let me be blunt again. They have sometimes contributed to the problem.
The NASA leader warning that upholding of President Uhuru Kenyatta's re-election will aggravate radicalization of minority of Kenyans who feel excluded from the regime. Odinga claiming the election boycott by some regions dented the re-election exercise, but the insistence from the Jubilee administration pointed at a nation trudging towards dictatorship.
It threatens to undo everything we've achieved and tearing apart our democratic and inter-ethnic fabric. Let me be blunt. Kenya is hurtling towards an outright dictatorship. The Jubilee government has regions roughshod over or looted every institution that they could in order to achieve their goal of long-term control of the state, or at least till their self-declared goal of ruling till at least 2032.
The opposition chief holding that an interim government is the only maneuver from the current murky waters. Odinga rooting for a constitutional review to check the executive powers and the state of devolution before a fresh election can be conducted.
A solution must be found in Kenya soon. Each day this crisis continues, the divisions, polarization, and the radicalization deepen.
The NASA leader had earlier met a section of the U.S. Congress leaders pushing for the West to pile pressure on Kenya's administration to force for a transitional government.
But a credible election is the only option Kenya has to give peace a chance, and even more important, heal a nation that has been torn into angry bits.
Odinga is set to jet back into the country over the weekend.
Yes. You're watching Power Breakfast, the news review with me, Fred Indimuli. Joining me this morning to discuss the headlines, Vincent Kimosop, Brian Weke, and Brian Mutie. Two brands. Good morning, gentlemen. I didn't realize.
So you should have
Good morning and karibu sana.
Thank you.
We'll continue with our news review this morning. Look at the big headline, of course, what Raila Odinga has just said. Raila seeks foreign help over crisis, but goes ahead and accuses foreign envoys of contributing to Kenya's political crisis. That's the big headline. We'll be talking about that. We'll also be looking at the Kuru death exposes gaps in county law with no requirement of by-election. Should a governor die in office, the deputy automatically takes over without obligation to appoint a deputy. Senators want this change and they've drafted a law with regard to that. We'll also be looking at the formation of people's assemblies. County assemblies are already working on those bills. Siaya became the first county assembly to pass that bill, to debate and pass the bill for the formation of the People's Assembly. What does it mean going forward? Gentlemen, on this issue, with regard to what Raila Odinga has just said, his accusation against foreign envoys, and that story is also on page 6 of the Daily Nation. Raila seeks U.S. help to end political impasse. He accuses Western envoys of dwelling on terrorism and ignoring basic democratic space. All along, NASA had been counting on foreign support. But it's a love-hate relationship. Once in a while, the foreign envoys are accused of siding with NASA. The other day, they're accused of siding with Jubilee. It's not, they're not sitting pretty, Brian.
Sure. I don't know which Brian, but
Brian Mutie. Now I have to tell you my full name. Brian Mutie.
Mutie and Weke. Make your life easy. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Fred. I think, first of all, it's it's a litmus test onto our sovereignty as a country, because as much as we just stamp that we are sovereign states with our internal democracies and so on, yet when things actually don't seem to go in our way, we rush to massage some egos somewhere. And I think that's something that has to be addressed. As much as we are saying that we Kenyans have to tackle our internal affairs as Kenyans, we do not have to go and massage some ego somewhere, because we still seem to be, inclined towards our former, oppressors and so on and so on. Those colonial machinations, we have to find a way of actually ensuring that we do not necessarily have to seek their attention. We do not have to, go and shed our tears in front of them to tell them that, we are not able to manage our own internal affairs as a country. But again, also that says something about our, in terms of globalization, that we are also part of the global village, that we have to share our experiences as a country. Whenever things are not right, whenever things are okay, we have a platform at the global level for us to showcase, yes, this is what we are going through, these are the teething issues in our democracy, and this is what is required, so that we can also get that kind of advisory on way forward. And therefore, this is I can look at the issue in a two-way, aspect.
And do you think, Brian, wake now that we are there, that Kenya, we realize that yes, we are in a stalemate, a political crisis, that yes, probably it is time that we get help from elsewhere in resolving our issue?
I think let's be honest with ourselves. While I accept that we are a sovereign state and we pride ourselves in the fact that we are actually a sovereign state, as Mutia says, and mark my choice of name,
yes.
It is extremely important to understand that Kenya is a global village. Fred, a lot has really changed. International community, and more so the local diplomats. You remember there are days where they stood for something. There are days where when we were still fighting for democracy in this country, they would say this is the route. But again, the problem we have is that engagement with other countries is purely about economic gain, is purely about what do we scramble for, what do we take in this country. And that's the reason why you see we are more closer to the Chinese and the East as opposed to the West. Now, there are certain fundamental issues that countries like the US, and the UK, and the UA, and the EU that stood for quickly is being joined by the fact that, again, how do we engage with a country like Kenya? Because Chinese, they don't care about your human rights agenda, they don't care about your human rights record, they don't care about your democracy. What they care about is business. And quickly we are seeing that all these diplomats, they actually headed that route. To them is, how do we make business?
Yes.
How do we continue providing security and training our soldiers? How do we continue using the Kenyan space to do whatever we are doing that we will gain? And sometimes I even ask myself, really, do we need such engagements? Because a country like Kenya that is still growing in terms of our democracy, it is important to inculcate certain democratic principles. And the US really stood for those particular principles. But guess what? Quickly, you saw when we had the first election, envoys were saying, accept and move on. I'm even shocked that envoys can actually tell Honorable Raila Odinga that you have to be on the ballot.
Have we given this envoys too much space? Because the question is, and yes, we do agree we are part of the international community, but rarely do we see our envoys elsewhere get a platform to actually talk about the democracy. For example, Kenya's ambassador to the US.
And his name, to be specific, is Njeru Gidai. Just think about Njeru Gidai issuing a press conference in Washington telling Donald Trump, hey, you are a divisive figure. Hey, as in telling...
he would be on the next
as in possibly a persona non grata. So, but for me, I think we have given our ambassadors, if you actually even, I'm trained as a diplomat, if you look at the ranking of ambassadors
in terms of from the president, foreign affairs to the they are not the seniors the attention that they receive. Now, let me say this, Fred. From Raila's presentation, I read three things. Number one is that the world has shifted, and this happened after the 2001 bombing of the World Trade Center. Yes. And then you saw that was it was like another Berlin Wall, where politics, global politics, shifted. And then thereafter, with the rise of China, the other thing is that people now started moving towards trade and commerce. So the thing that Kenyans need to know very clearly that ambassadors are here not because of Kenyan interest. Ambassadors are here primarily because of the interest they represent. Yes. And for us to fool ourselves that they are here to advance our good, hey, we are actually on the wrong. And for me, there is nothing wrong with the diplomats advancing their interests.
And being partisan in their approach.
Because even the former secretary of foreign affairs secretary in the UK once said the UK does not have permanent friends nor permanent enemies. All we have are permanent interests. They are here to advance their interests. So in my view, I would understand. I have already explained that from the Berlin Wall, it was to the West democratization, because with the democratization they were able to do more business in a transparent, open environment. Then with the fall of with the 911, what happened is that issues of terrorism, security now came to the fore. So you will find, you can look at Egypt, Ethiopia, and look at Kenya. You will notice that in terms of the levels of democratic journey, they are at different levels. But Americans, for example, will work with any regime that advances their interests, and that is
Fred. And joining the panel, allow me to introduce the only lady on the panel now, Mary Mwangi.
The Berlin Wall that we have actually created between the two.
It is wonderful to
Berlin Wall.
Now I can tell the difference between one brand.
Okay, yeah, Fred, if you may allow me to go before the lady, with no apologies observed.
No worries.
I think I wanted to correct maybe a sort of misconception that we are currently inclined towards the East. The truth of the matter is that as much as we are, milking something or gaining something economically from the Chinese and so on and so on, we are yet to, get unanchored from the Western sort of orientation that we have had ever since the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain in 1991, 89, and so on and so on. The reason why I'm saying so is as much as we are looking at the only pillar which we are benefiting from the Chinese, we should not be blind to the other aspects, the other pillars. Of course, we are talking about the social pillar and the political pillar. Those two pillars we are still, inclined towards the Western, and that's why in terms of political, when we are knocking at those doors, we do not knock at the East, we always knock at the Western to get that kind of direction. And that's also to say that the role that we play geopolitically as a country in this Africa continent, of course, it says much, because the interest that the Western spearhead across the continent, and also the sub-Saharan Africa, and also the Horn of Africa, they use Kenya as a launching pad. And you realize that there's a beehive of activities in this country, a lot of concentration of activities which are always spearheaded as an interest from the Western. When you look at socially, I think I'm yet to see somebody going to China, coming back after maybe 2 months and starting training in Chinese. And therefore we always take pride in actually, picking something in terms of accent.
Much on our politics.
Nobody. And in fact, they are not even concerned. But they are only concerned about the political sphere. They are only concerned with how they can make business with us. But as far as the economic and the social pillar, it's a no-go zone for us.
Yes, Mary Mwangi, the question is, are we allowing these foreign envoys too much space to comment on our politics? Because now they run the risk of being accused of being partisan. But could the problem be us that we're giving them a platform. We do not see our own envoys commenting on other people's issues.
Well, we need to understand what we're looking at in terms of geopolitics, as my fellow panelists have explained, that they have interests, and these interests are obviously economic. But then also remember that countries in Africa that have gone to war, and it was a slippery slope, a very slow slide. A lot of these countries later on argued, where was the international community? Why didn't they make noise? Why didn't they protect us? A case in point is Rwanda in 1994. So the question now is, are they partisan or not? But not really. But when we look at the Jubilee government from the international community's perspective, we can see what they stand for. It's about business, it's about economics. The NASA government's message has constantly been, we need to overhaul... Sorry. A possible NASA government. Sorry, very early in the morning, very early. I haven't had my breakfast. A possible NASA government would be one where you're looking at an overhaul of the economic situation. You're looking at the kind of messaging they've been giving, where we will take back land, we will redistribute resources. So it's very uncomfortable for international investors to look at that as a possible government to work with.
Well, Brian, do you agree that the kind of politics that NASA stands for does not augur well with the international community, and probably that's why they look like they're friendly to the Jubilee administration?
I think what I can decipher what we've basically just said. It is about business. It is about those countries' interests. And that, for me, is extremely unfortunate, because, you know, Kenya, we pride ourselves as a country that we've really grown in terms of our democratic space. I think Kenya, we can only compare it in Africa to maybe Ghana,
South Africa,
and South Africa. And we're doing fairly well. We are the only country in Africa where the Supreme Court has actually said that the election was not conducted according to the Constitution. Now that does not happen anywhere. So we are growing as a country. And that's the reason why, Fred, if you ask me, I really struggle to see our friends from the West. As Mutia says, we have been for over nearly now 50 years. We have grown in terms of our democratic space, and it is modeled based on the West, and really not the East. And that's the reason why, where we are as a country, when I hear our people saying that we need to secede, you can see clearly that there is exclusion, clearly distribution of resources does not reach all corners of this country, and yet we have attempted as a country to set up certain institutions, certain processes, which again, we have something called death by the drawer. If you look at the TJRC report, I know it was amended a number of times, it attempted to deal with our issues of exclusion, whether real or perceived, yet nothing has ever happened. If you look at the Ndungu land report, it mentioned certain things, certain processes. Look at the Kriegler report. Again, as a country, and that's where we go wrong. We have buried our heads in the sand, this nonsense of let's accept and move on. We quickly put a elastoplast and we think we've dealt with issues as a country. And until and unless we sit down with the Kimosops and so and say, look here, this is where we went wrong. This is where we need to look at. This is where we need to start. And if you ask me, the Western diplomats ought to stand for those things.
But Brian, you know, for me, I have worked with Brian in the civil society in the past. I think this is also a good thing for us, because it is exactly telling us that we cannot outsource our destiny to diplomats and foreign interests. We have to be the determinants and the primary drivers of our interests. Define them and clearly articulate them. Like, look at.
Do you, for example, disagree with this NASA leader asking Kenya's international partners to engage the country more robustly and help it end the current political statement? Do you disagree with him?
I don't disagree with him, because the preamble of our constitution says very clearly it acknowledges the aspirations of all Kenyans. Raila Odinga is one of the Kenyans, including the people who supported him. So that engagement is okay. And even Article 3 says that it gives us when we gave ourselves a constitution, we gave ourselves framework how to mediate our interests. Our challenge has been the narrowness in terms of depth in implementing the constitution, the different reports that have pointed us on how do we become a greater people and a greater country. Like at this point, I can tell you, we are discussing a free, fair and credible election, right? That will give us leadership that we would want. Now, that already, the process is outlined in the constitutions and the laws, and even as the Supreme Court shows us, follow the process, because the process is important as the product. Now, the element of implementing that is actually where our issue is. So, the issue of engagement, that is okay, but let us appreciate that we should be the primary drivers of these issues rather than foreign interests and actors being the primary, because I can tell you they will not be championing first our interests, they will be championing our interests. So the approach for me is really what I would advocate, that let it be a Kenyan driven process.
It's not easy. Sorry. Thank you so much. It's not easy, as Kimosop would want to put it, where we are able to dictate the terms. Remember, we are compared in terms of our economy compared to those bigger giants in the Americans and the British and so on and so on. Those are countries that their economy cannot be dictated by our terms. We have to toe the line, and that's why, if you remember very well, as a good student of history, when Condoleezza Rice came here, when we had an impasse in 2008, he told us that it was not business as usual, and that statement, of course, cannot be just interpreted in terms of its face value. Of course, if you analyze the gains that we normally get from those countries, of course, vis-a-vis what they gain from us, I think it's incomparable. And if you look at the AGOA arrangement, of course, the America business kind of partnership with Africa, it is one of the avenues where Africa, especially Kenya, has really gained a lot. When you look at the kind of intervention that the Westerns have been actually, bringing directly here in our country, they are huge. In fact, if you look at what the US itself has been able to channel here in terms of funding, in terms of interventions, health matters of healthcare and the security, the moment those people decide that they are not going to support us in any way, I think we shall remain as a shell of our country. Let me just be clear on this one. And it's important that you interrogate these issues in a deeper context, other than just looking at, your economy. Our economy itself needs a lot of support from other countries, because when you look at the kind of security apparatus that those people normally support us through, in terms of surveillance, in terms of intelligence gathering and so on, it's a lot. In terms of healthcare, as I said before, in terms of trade, in terms of other interventions that they normally bring into this country, you cannot wish those people to be away.
Whatever they say about our situation has to be right.
Of course, there has to be some bit of balance, but we have to look at the bigger picture, of course. The other day, let me just finish up this one. Just to bring it much home or much closer. Yesterday we had some issues to do with the Tanzania-Kenya relationship. The other day we had an issue with the Kenya-Uganda relationship. If you look at the kind of business that we do with those two countries, of course, if Migingo is anything to go by, I think that should be an issue, because we do more business with Uganda than any other country in Africa, any other country in the world, and we do business with Uganda in the same magnitude, and therefore it all goes down into matters of relationship, other than looking at the narrower picture in the perspective.
But I believe what Kimosop and Brian Wesley are trying to say, and I'm sorry to disagree with you on this point, I agree in terms of economics and geopolitics, but what they're explaining is we need to address what people feel is unfair in our society, be it in terms of politics, be it in terms of access to the economy. That is what people want addressed. And what Kimosop was pointing out is, yes, the international community has addressed us and asked us, you need to have free and fair elections, and they must be credible. But we also need to understand, what is it that went wrong with the system? Why is it that every 5 years we have the same issues rearing their ugly head? So as Kimosop has pointed out, we need to first address these issues. Brian pointed out that the TJRC has written a report about the injustices perceived and real. So now, as a nation, as a people, let us go and ask ourselves, where did it start going wrong? How do we address these issues? How do we allow for free, fair elections where everybody feels a part of this country and not feeling that they must secede from this country?
But don't you think that we all understand these things and what we need to do, but we're just not doing it because probably we're totally unable? And Raila Odinga calling on Big Brother to come help us is probably the way to go, right?
Fred, it's just basically what I wanted to say. I am one of those proponents who say that we are a sovereign state. We know what we want. We need our own...
it's not a problem of understanding our issues. We understand our issues.
So our biggest problem is that we have... sometimes I don't know what happens. You find somebody who is very articulate, somebody who stands for certain things, but when they get into politics, then you wonder what has happened. You find a guy like my brother Timoso, who now you hear he says we know our issues, but we definitely know those issues. We definitely know what we need to do, but we just don't do it. That's the reason why you hear the other people were saying we have to swear in Uhuru Kenyatta. There are no two ways about it. We need to proceed. We need to ensure we have a president. We need to swear him in because it is about interests. We forget about the fact that nearly 50% of the country is not coming with you, and that is a problem. I hear them saying that we don't have a problem. Yes, we do, and that is the reason why sometimes if we cannot sort out our issues because of our parochial, partisan, ethnic interests, then we have to call on a friend. That is the reason why, yes, your house is your house. Yes, you might have your own wife, but as a friend, I have to tell you, my brother, here you're going wrong. So then it is up to you as the owner of the house with your wife to see how to deal with it. And that's the reason why it is important, even though we respect our sovereignty and the fact that we need to have our local solutions, sometimes it is important to call on your neighbor and your brother to remind you that, look here, yes, you want to proceed, but you're not proceeding in the right direction.
Vincent?
I think if you look at how did we arrive at this thing? It was about the issues of diplomats and what interest do they represent? And my articulation was, I understand where they're coming from. Their first responsibility is to fight for their own interest, and that is understood. So the point is, it is important for us as Kenyans to take charge of our own interests and on our own issues.
And do you think that's the problem? The problem is we are totally unable to do that.
No, we are not that we are unable. We are not unable to do that. I think like the way we just have a conversation inside here, we were invited, we've all come here. I believe what is needed is just a leadership, in my view, that is going to accelerate issues. Let me just give an example. In 2007, so that we benefit from history, you remember the 4 agenda items. The first one, cessation of violence. Then we went on to addressing the issues of insecurity. Then the third thing was the political question. The fourth thing was agenda 4. You notice that they made progress on all that. But when it came to agenda item number 3, there was a stalemate in Serena. What happened? The former U.S. Secretary of State, the former UN Secretary General had a meeting between Kibaki and Raila, and in the afternoon we had a solution. Now the point is, how comes that when the two of the hold on. The point I'm saying, Brian, is that if we have a sovereign people who have given ourselves a constitution, don't you think it is important we implement the letter and the spirit? Like now, why I listen to people who are advocating, for example, for cessation, and I tell them, excuse me, by there our constitution as currently is already acknowledges the aspirations of all Kenyans. Here you're looking at those who are in Jubilee, those who are in NASA, those even who are neither. All their aspirations are acknowledged in the constitution. So then my view is that where is it that the constitution has not addressed your issue, so that becomes the premise for addressing our issue? The point, Brian, is that let's go back to the crossroads and look back and ask, where did we miss the road, and walk in that pathway. That is I'm calling us to a higher level of accountability.
Vincent Kimoso does not feel the need to call on Big Brother to come help us. Brian Weke believes it is high time we did that. Mary Mwangi? Is it time to call on Big Brother?
It's not time to call on Big Brother. It is time for us, as Kim Osop very eloquently put it, to look at the spirit of our constitution, to ask ourselves, why is it that there is a whole chunk of this country that feels that they're not part and parcel of the system, that they have never been part and parcel of the system. So we now need to address these issues and ask ourselves, is our type of politics the type of politics that will be inclusive rather than exclusive? But we also need to understand that we're 54 years old, very, very young. These nations that are giving us ideas and guiding us, so to speak, have been through so much more than we have gone through. Hundreds of years of war, demarcations of their boundaries changing every now and then, refugees, wars that have killed people. So we must first and foremost pat ourselves on the back that we have not gone down that road. We are a multi-ethnic society which is very unique, and we must safeguard that uniqueness, and we must also address the issue of each and every one of us to feel part and parcel of this nation.
Brian, very briefly, is it time to call on Big Brother or not?
I think this is contextual because since the fall of since the Cold War actually started biting us, we have something we used to call the structural adjustment programs, of course the STAPs. And for those who have been following history keenly, like as I do, we do agree that ever since 1991, actually after that is when we started having the rain beating us in terms of our economy, and that's when for the first time Kenyans were able to go to hospitals at a cost. That's when we started paying school fees. I mean, everything was actually, catered for because there was that kind of good relationship with the Westerners, because the Americans and the Westerners were really pumping a lot of money towards, because they still wanted us to incline towards the West. But ever since the collapse of the, Iron Curtain, of course they did not massage our egos further, and they left us to, scamper for our survival. And that's why the SAPs came into place. And therefore we have to understand that ever since those moments, up to now, we have never been able to stand on our own without that support of the Western. So therefore we need them, but the context of how we need them is actually something that we need to discuss this debate another day.
Time now for a break. When we come back, we take a look at other headlines. People's Assembly. Yes, People's Assemblies, county assemblies are already discussing, debating and passing bills. Transformation of People's Assemblies. We'll be looking at that and a lot more.